Hola a todos, buenas tardes.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome to Fundación Telefónica. I'm going to introduce David Blázquez, who is the programs manager of Aspen Institute in Spain, and my name is Pablo Gonzalo. I work in digital culture area of Telefónica Foundation. We would like to welcome all of you and introduce you to this new session of this cycle called Tech and Society that we organize together between Fundación Telefónica and Aspen Institute. We have been collaborating since 2017 in this cycle and through to this year, and we are trying to explore all the changes and the big topics that the technological development is generating in our society. It is true that from last year we have touched topics such as education, relationship between technology and culture, the bubble filters. That's a topic we discussed with Eli Pariser. We talked about economy with Brian Aben, how the future work is going to look like in smart cities, and so we are dealing with different topics and that are being really transformed by this revolution, this technological revolution. And here we are today in order to talk about one of the topics that are changing our society the most, the way we relate to each other, we relate to companies, which is privacy, data privacy. Are we the real owners of our data or not? And Sandy is going to deliver a presentation about his mindset and his point of view on this topic, and I think that it will be very enriching and very illustrative to all of us, and then we will have a discussion with him and we will open a Q&A session. So that's all on my part before turning the floor over to David. I would just like to thank you for your attendance and remind you that if you want to access any other session that we have organized about this in this cycle, you can go and do so through our website, and they are all recorded there, and that's all. You have the floor. Hi, good afternoon. You are very bold. This is a very interesting topic. We have had a long weekend, a very long weekend, some of us at least, and days after a long weekend is really very difficult to get people coming. So I'm quite surprised, and so thank you very much for being here. There are many people who are loyal to this cycle. We have been dealing with the impact of technology on the different areas of society, politics, culture, social relations, biology, the future of labor. It is a pleasure for us, for Aspen Institute, to work together with Fundación Telefónica. It is being really a pleasure and a great discovery on our part. We see that we are generating an impact on society. That's why we foundations exist. And I would just like to thank Sandy Parakilas for being here. Sandy worked 2 years in Facebook between 2011 and 2012, and he dealt with privacy there. And he is going to provide us with an overview of the most controversial topics around privacy. The case of Cambridge Analytica. He has worked for Uber. That is one of the most prominent profiles in Silicon Valley and in the technological startups. A couple of weeks ago, he started working for the Center for Humane Technology that really deals with and analyzing the impact of technology from a human point of view. We think it is a very appropriate profile, and that will add a great deal of information to perspective to our discussion. Natalia Martos is going to introduce the discussion and the Q&A session. She is a lawyer who is focused on technology. She has worked for Prisa Group and for Twitter, and for some years, she's quite young, but anyway, she's been in the world of technology and has been a lawyer for many years. So thank you very much to both of you for being here, and let's enjoy your presentation. Sandy, you have the floor.
And so thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Aspen Institute and the Telefónica Foundation for bringing me here. I'm really excited to be in Madrid. I was telling some folks earlier that this is my very first trip to Madrid, not my first trip to Spain, my very first trip to Madrid, and it is a beautiful city. I will definitely be back soon. So I wanted to come here and talk to you guys about a few things. I wanted to do really kind of three topics. The first is I wanted to tell you about my experience at Facebook, some of the things that I saw and some of the things that weren't done, that should have been done, that led us to the current moment and the issues with Cambridge Analytica and other problems. The second thing I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about some of the broader issues with technology and some of the issues with the business model that technology companies use, which has caused a lot of these problems. And finally, I want to talk to you about some solutions. So the organization that I work with now, the Center for Humane Technology, is advocating for a number of solutions which cut across things that users like you or me can do to protect ourselves better, to solutions that companies like Facebook and Google can implement, to regulatory solutions, whether it's GDPR or some of the new regulations that will come out in the US and other places. So with no further ado, let me dive right into my experience at Facebook. So I joined Facebook in 2011. And it was a very, very exciting time for the company. At that point, the company had about 500 million users, which is a lot fewer than it has today. But it was the moment at which I think the world realized that Facebook was kind of taking over and was going to win the social media race. And the movie The Social Network had just come out, and all young tech entrepreneurs wanted to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. He was sort of the icon of Silicon Valley. And my job at Facebook was managing a team of people on Facebook platform. This is the part of Facebook that allowed developers, whether it was games like Farmville or music applications like Spotify or others, to build applications that connected to Facebook and became social as a result of their connection to Facebook. They could let you see your friends and interact with your friends in the app. And when I showed up for my very first week, I was told that I was going to be leading this team, and the main goal that I had been given was to ensure that Facebook apps were in compliance with Facebook's policy, so they followed the rules. And then, immediately after I found out that, I found out a very concerning fact. Facebook, in fact, had no ability to see what was happening with its data, with your data, once it left Facebook and went to one of these developers. And to make matters worse, it had no control. So not only could they not see, they also couldn't control the data that had been passed to developers. And some of these apps were very, very, very large. Apps like Farmville had more than 100 million users. And not only was Facebook passing data from those users to the developers, it was also passing data from the friends of the users. So at the time, there were something like 200, the average Facebook user had about 200 friends. And so if you had an app that had 100 million users, and each of those users had 200 friends, now you're talking about 20 billion connections worth of data. That's obviously way more than the number of users on Facebook. So you were getting the entirety of Facebook and a lot of the connections between people on Facebook. And when you add those things together, it was really concerning to me. Like, you have these huge apps that are getting huge amounts of data. Facebook has no ability to detect what's happening with that data, no ability to determine if people are actually following the rules or not. And my job was to make sure that they didn't break the rules. And to make matters worse, the privacy settings on Facebook were very complicated. So most of this data was actually private. So it was personally identifiable data about you specifically, that was private because you the user had decided in most cases that you didn't want to share this data with the whole world. You wanted to only share it with your friends or even smaller subsets of your friends. So I started looking at ways that Facebook could do a better job of protecting its users. And unfortunately, I felt quite stymied in my efforts to do that. I'll give you one example. So Facebook had an audit right, the ability to audit developers who are using its platform to ensure that they were actually using the data in a way that was compliant. But during my tenure, the year and a half I spent at the company, the company never used that audit right once, to my knowledge. And I continuously asked for, more intensive audits, or really any audits. And the company did not want to do that. And as far as I could tell, the reason that they didn't want to do that was because they were concerned that if they actually investigated and they found something bad, that they would be liable for whatever had happened. Whereas if they didn't know, because they just didn't audit and they didn't check, then they weren't liable, and they could just say, well, we're just a platform, and some other third party used data in a way that was not okay, and we didn't find out about it, and they wouldn't be held liable. And that really concerned me. And I'll give you a specific example of how some of this kind of enforcement actually happened in practice. So in one case, I was asked to investigate an app called Clout. And I don't know if you guys remember Clout, but for a while, Clout was an app that would give you a score based on how many friends you had on Facebook, how many followers you had on Twitter, how much you tweeted, things like that. It was basically a popularity ranking. They kind of tried to make it sound more important than that, but it was just like, how popular are you on social media? And there was a report that ran in the New York Times that said that Clout was actually making unauthorized profiles of children, which is pretty concerning, right? So parents would go on Clout, and they had given Clout access to their Facebook data, and then they would see there was a profile of their 14-year-old kid, and the kid had never used Clout. Picture, name. So we were very concerned by that. The New York Times was very concerned by that. Parents were very concerned by that. So it was my job to call up Clout and say, hey, what are you doing? This looks like it's not compliant with Facebook's policies. Are you compliant? And they swore up and down that they were compliant, and they said, we promise we're compliant. But because I had no ability to actually go in and audit, I couldn't prove that they were using Facebook data to make these unauthorized profiles. So we just had to take their word for it. And I didn't think that was really sufficient. I believe in the case of Clout that they actually removed that feature so that people weren't reporting that this was still happening, either right before or right after I called them. But it's worth noting that was a very rare case where a data protection violation happened in public. And as we all found out later with Cambridge Analytica, there were massive data protection violations that were happening that were not public and that only came out years later. So another problem I had in trying to enforce was resourcing. So I had no engineers who directly reported to me to work on these problems, and I had no budget to do external partnerships to try to protect users. It just wasn't a corporate priority to protect the users of Facebook. Meanwhile, the ads team and the growth team, which were building things that the company really cared about, getting more users and getting more money, were overstaffed with engineers. They had tons and tons of engineers, they had lots of money, and they could just build feature after feature after feature. So as a result of this corporate indifference to data protection, little meaningfully improved during my tenure at the company, and ultimately I got frustrated and I left the company in late 2012 and joined a startup that was working on social media advertising. Before I left, though, I did create a PowerPoint presentation that showed some of the vulnerabilities that were exposed as a result of this architecture. And I shared it with a number of people, including some of the executives. And one of the things that I called out was the fact that there was this vulnerability where once Facebook passed data to a developer, there was no way of preventing that developer from passing the data to another person, an ad network, a data broker. I also said there's a possibility, though I haven't seen it, that they might pass it to a foreign state actor, right? A foreign spy service. And while there were people at Facebook who cared about this and were concerned by this, especially the privacy team and the security team, nothing really meaningful changed even after I left, despite my efforts. And it wasn't until 2015, so 3 years after I left, that Facebook finally closed down the friend permission, which is the ability to get data from the friends of the people who use your app, which is what made this problem so bad. And in the interim period, Cambridge Analytica happened. And so you guys have probably heard at this point about what happened in the 2016 election. A data broker called Cambridge Analytica got access to the information of 87 million Americans, and I think some EU citizens too, although that hasn't been made clear. And they used that data to build models to predict people's behavior. This is the part that I think hasn't been really well explained in the media. They weren't that interested in the fact that you like Starbucks and Nike and a particular football team. That wasn't their goal. But if they have all that data, then they can predict how you would vote. They can predict your personality. They can predict a lot of really personal things about you. And they did just that. They built these models to predict how people would act. And then allegedly the Trump campaign used that data to target people in the US election, and it's looking increasingly likely that some of that data may have been used in the Brexit campaign in the UK around the same time. And who knows, it's possible the data was used elsewhere as well in other elections. So the power of big data to influence elections is only now really being understood. And I think there's some stats about the Trump campaign specifically that are worth calling out, because they show the difference between a campaign that uses big data versus a campaign that doesn't, and what the impact is. So the Trump campaign ran 5.9 million different variations of ads. So the little ads you see in Facebook when you're scrolling through your news feed, they had 5.9 million different versions of those ads. And the Hillary Clinton campaign only had 66,000 different versions. So the Trump campaign was using exponentially more versions of ads. And the reason they were doing that is they were testing them constantly. On one day, they tested 175,000 different kinds of ads in a single day. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out what is exactly the right message that will influence you, right? An individual. Potentially also using the personality predictions and voting predictions that they had gotten from Cambridge Analytica. And as a result of this really, really powerful use of big data, they also had a huge price advantage over the Clinton campaign. And there's been one report that they paid as much as 17 times less per impression of an ad than the Hillary Clinton campaign. So this is just a massive, massive advantage that they got from using big data and allegedly using the Cambridge Analytica data set, which was effectively stolen, right? Taken in violation of Facebook rules. At the same time, there were foreign state actors who were exploiting Facebook as well. So the Russian Internet Research Agency, which is a part of their spy services, exploited Facebook and reached 126 million Americans with both regular Facebook posts from fake profiles that they created and also ads. And so as I saw all of this in 2016 and into 2017, I became really concerned because a lot of the things that I had been worried about when I worked at Facebook were actually starting to come true. And in the interim, I hadn't talked publicly about these issues, partly because I thought maybe I was being too alarmist, right? Maybe these issues are more abstract than I made them out to be. But it became clear in the 2016 election, as I learned more about Brexit and, the election integrity of other countries, that the stuff I was worried about was real. And it was actually now being used. All right, so now that you've heard a bit about my story, I want to talk about the real elephant in the room here, the actual central villain of this issue. And it's actually not Facebook. It's not really tech companies per se, and it's not Russian internet trolls or data brokers or anything like that. I think that the real problem here is that these tech companies have a business model that creates a misalignment between the person who uses the product and the person who pays for the product. They have this business model where you, the user, are getting the product for free, but in fact, what you're giving up in payment is a vast quantity of data about yourself. And that data is then used against you. It's then leased out to advertisers who aren't really vetted at all, to advertise products to you based on your characteristics and predictions of your behavior. And that's relatively innocuous if someone's trying to sell you detergent, right? There's only so much, you can only be so abusive when you're selling soap. But when you're trying to influence an election, this misalignment becomes incredibly dangerous because you, the customer, are in fact the product that's being sold. And because of this model, the amount of data that's being collected about people is increasing at an exponential rate, right? It's really growing very, very quickly. And yet our ability to predict and to protect our users or the users of these products from the worst use cases isn't really increasing at all. And to make things worse, the biggest companies, Google and Facebook, have taken an approach where knowing less about the kinds of abuse that's happening to them is a more legally defensible position. And so they haven't really been investing in understanding how abuse is happening because it benefits them. And this is an untenable situation, I think. Well, if you think that's bad, I'm now going to paint an even scarier picture, which is that as we look forward, what technology lets companies do is even more terrifying. So sophisticated artificial intelligence will allow software platforms like Facebook and Google and others to predict your behavior before you even take an action. And in fact, it was recently revealed that Facebook has been working on AI, artificial intelligence, to do exactly that. And the reason that they're doing that is they want to be able to sell the ability to find users who are likely to do a particular action to advertisers. And this is scary because a relatively small amount of data can be used to predict incredibly personal things about you. There was a study a few years ago that showed that with just consumer purchase history, just a record of what you've bought, that companies can, with pretty good accuracy, predict whether a woman is pregnant or not. And in some cases, in one actual case that happened in the United States, a store sent an ad for pregnancy-related materials to a woman who didn't realize that she was pregnant. She then took a test and found out that she was, in fact, pregnant. So we're moving into a world where big data enables companies to predict things about you that you don't even know about yourself. And then to take this even further, Facebook and other companies are working on technology to connect your devices directly to your brain. They want the ability to, and they're starting to develop the ability to read your brain waves and use that to control devices. And so this is, if you put those two things together, these companies will have the ability to read your thoughts and they can predict your activities before you do them, and then they are selling the ability to manipulate that to a set of advertisers that they're not screening. I would argue that that is pretty scary. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the specific harms that have that have come out of this. One of the other things that has been the result of this business model is that tech companies have an incentive to try to addict you to their products. They want you to use YouTube and Facebook and Twitter every day for as many hours as possible, because that's how they make money. Every extra minute that you spend on their services is another minute that they can show you an ad and charge someone for that ad. And that results in some pretty bad effects on the people who use the products, i.e. you and me. So here are a few examples of science that's just coming out now about the effects. So with respect to negative well-being, there are now multiple studies that show that feelings of negative well-being are associated with greater use of Facebook. And in fact, Facebook's own studies as of late last year have partially backed up these findings. Even Facebook is admitting that more Facebook can make you sad. In an even more upsetting note, the arrival of smartphones have corresponded with a 60% increase in the number of children who have experienced at least one episode of depression. So there's not causation yet, but there's clear correlation between smartphones and depression in children. And teenagers in the US who spend 3 hours a day or more on electronic devices are 35% more likely to have a risk factor for suicide than those who spend less than 1 hour. And if you look at the ones who spend more than 5 hours on these devices, they are 71% more likely to have a risk factor for suicide. In terms of sleep, 90% of sleep studies show an adverse correlation between use of devices and sleep health. So basically, using your device, your smartphone, your laptop, is making you sleep worse. 90% of studies show that. Cyberbullying, which is a thing that did not exist before the internet, may now affect up to 40% of children. So almost half of all kids are being cyberbullied. And children who are cyberbullied are 3 times more likely to contemplate suicide than victims of traditional bullying. So unfortunately, that is only a partial list of the negative health effects that are associated with smartphones and social media. And it is part of a larger group of studies that my organization, the Center for Humane Technology, is gathering and will be sharing with the world as we start looking for solutions. So let's switch to a more positive note. So let's talk about the way that we can improve the situation, the way that you can take control, and the way that companies and governments can fix some of these issues. So about 3 months ago, I helped start an organization called the Center for Humane Technology. And we are dedicated to fighting for better technology that is aligned with humanity's best interests. So rather than aligning technology with what advertisers want, we want to align it with what people like you and I need, the people who use the tech. So as I mentioned, we're creating this ledger of harms, which is going to be a aggregation of studies about some of the negative effects. We want to put them in a place where everyone can access them, read them in multiple languages, and then we want to also start adding solutions, whether it's people telling their stories of how they have, improved their relationship with their phones, or whether it's new tech that can actually improve the problems of old tech. There are also some steps that businesses like Facebook and Google can take to ensure that they treat their customers' data and their customers with more respect. Many of the changes that have been made after the Russian interference scandal and the Cambridge Analytica scandal have been very tactical improvements. Like, it's been very much about fixing specific things that were exploited by those bad actors. A much higher level solution would be to change the business model of these companies so that they're making money directly from you rather than from a third party who may be trying to take advantage of you. So, for example, adding a subscription option for users would enable the companies to make money directly. Facebook, for example, also has other ways of making money. They have a marketplace that has a tremendous amount of transactions that they're not monetizing, that they could start charging some fees for, and they have other options as well. And one of the things that's really interesting is that, while most people have asked, say they don't want to pay for social media, if you look at how much of your cell phone bill and your internet bill is paid to download ads and how much time you spend looking at ads, avoiding ads, and clicking through ads, it is a meaningful percentage. It is a meaningful double-digit percentage of your money that's being wasted on advertisements that you don't want. And so if you think in those terms, like, I could save you 20, 30, 40 euros per month in your internet bill, for example, by getting rid of ads, you'd probably be much more likely to want to pay for some kind of subscription. In terms of user fixes, things that you and I can do, there are a number of steps that I recommend, and these are things that I have done myself, to lessen your addiction to your phone and to take control of your life, take it back from software that's not designed with your best interests at heart. The first thing you can do is do an audit of all your notifications. Most of us get way too many notifications on our phone. Ideally, you should only be getting notified by other humans who you actually know. If you think about the notifications that you get, most of them are probably from apps that are trying to tell you about this great new deal that's happening this weekend, or from an email from someone you don't know asking you to do something that you don't really want to do. You don't really need to get that notification in the middle of a meeting. So if you go through and audit your apps, you can turn off notifications entirely on apps that don't send you messages from people you know. And then you can also winnow down some of the notifications you're getting from some of the apps that do. I'll give you a personal example. So I've gone through and I've deleted all the Facebook apps, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp from my phone. And I'd still use Twitter professionally, but I've turned off the notification badge, so I don't see if anyone's trying to, interact with me on Twitter unless I go into Twitter and look myself. So I have to take the action to I'm not constantly getting bombarded with stuff from Twitter. Another thing that you can do that is surprising but incredibly powerful is you can change your phone's screen from color to grayscale. So grayscale is black, gray, and white. And when you explain that to people, they always say, like, why would I do that? That sounds ugly, and I don't understand why I do it. But the reason that you want to do that is because your phone has been built to be bolder and more beautiful, have bolder and more beautiful colors than the real world. It's its own world that wants to suck you in. And the apps that are on your phone are using that to their advantage, and their agenda is not your agenda, right? The reason notifications are in red aren't because it's trying to notify you of something that is important to you. It's because they know that red is a trigger color that signifies importance and makes your brain light up. And if the app is trying to get your attention because it's trying to sell you something, that they can use that to tell you to pay attention. And the reality is we're all so overstimulated now by all these notifications and colors that if you just try it for a day and you just turn your phone screen to grayscale, which on iOS or Android you can do in the accessibility settings of your phone, you'll find at the end of the day two things. One is that you will have not reached for your phone as much because we're so conditioned to get that that blast of happiness by seeing all those bright colors that you stop using it, you stop being drawn to your phone, and you start only reaching for your phone when you want to use it. And the second thing is, at the end of the day, when you put down your phone and you look up, the world is beautiful, and you think, I don't want to use my phone anymore. I want to go outside and enjoy the day or the night. And that's an amazing feeling that I think a lot of us have forgotten. Certainly, I forgot that, and I was reminded of it by doing that. So finally, in terms of regulatory fixes, this is a particularly active time for regulation as a result of all these scandals, which is a very good thing. We are catching up on the regulatory side with all the practice. And so one of the things that I'm excited about is, with GDPR coming into effect, we finally have a real regulatory framework for users' privacy rights. It's only in Europe right now. It's not perfect, but it is a massive step forward. And I'm excited to see that get integrated into all of these companies' products. In the US, we have a number of efforts that are underway to try to copy GDPR in a number of ways. We haven't gotten to the point where we have something that is anywhere near as good as GDPR yet, but even just having the conversation in the US, it's a conversation that we've refused to have for years and years and years, and now there are multiple people at the federal level and at the state level who want to move forward with something, and that's a big step forward. There's a separate issue that is worth calling out, which is that we have huge issues around the liability for content that is created on these platforms. So if you use Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, you create your own content. And one of the things that has come out of all of these recent controversies is that people don't like and have reasonable concerns about how content is shown to you and is moderated. And the reason that there has been no good development of reasonable moderation policies by these companies is, at least in the US, they are not liable for what anyone does on their platforms. They are protected by a 20-year-old law, which was designed to enable the internet to happen. And so they haven't bothered to really invest in good content policies or good content enforcement because they can't be sued as a result. So finally, as a result of all of these conversations, we're finally having the discussion about giving liability for the worst cases. I think in this law, it's called the Communications Decency Act, was very important for getting the internet off the ground. But as we see the harm move to the level of genocide in Myanmar driven from Facebook, and violence in Sri Lanka and India driven from Facebook apps, and election meddling across many different platforms, and wildly inappropriate content on YouTube Kids. As we start getting into serious society level concerns, I think we're finally starting to say, wait a minute, we do need some liability. That's the only way these companies will take the really serious stuff seriously. So that is the end of the remarks that I have prepared for you. I am looking forward to everyone's questions. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Andy.
Thank you very much, Andy. It has been a great speech.
Hola a todos.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you very much for coming. The ones that are here in the room and the ones that are watching it through streaming. I invite you to use hashtag TechSociety in order to ask your questions, to make your contributions, so that we can have a great discussion with Sandy. I would like to make a brief introduction to the discussion that is called I'm the Owner of My Data. I'd like to say that for this question, well, it is difficult to answer, because we are in a world that is absolutely global, where technologies are increasingly growing, where companies have realized that the personal data are one of the most important and precious assets that they can have. So we are seeing that there are international data transfers, data purchases, and in fact illegal transfers of these data. So we have come to a point where the user, the owner of these data, and that's us, citizens, we've lost control. And we don't realize, because sometimes we say, well, the Facebook data, no, they don't belong to Facebook. They are our data. They are our fundamental right. So I would like to put a framework for the discussion, and to say that we're really fortunate to have Sandy here, because we are going through a historic moment for the ones that are experts and that have worked in privacy, etc. We are very lucky because we are in a reputational crisis in Facebook because of Cambridge Analytica, first of all, and secondly, because on the 25th of May, there will be the GDPR law will come into force. It has been in force for 2 years, but there's a misunderstanding, because people think that it will come into force at the 25th. No, it came into force 2 years ago, but these 2 years we have been adapting companies, not many, just 4% seems that have adapted at the global scale, and the 25th of May is the final deadline. But let's be realistic, the 25th is a kickoff, so to speak, so that all companies are aware of the fact that they have to give back these rights to the owners. So it's important to underline that this GDPR, what it does is to give back to the user his or her fundamental rights. And this is because in Europe, the right to data protection is a fundamental right that is recognized in the European law. This is not the case in the US, and this is why the US giants, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, have been able to use data from European citizens with a totally different legislation that is much more naive, so to speak, that has affected our privacy. So today we are lucky because this regulation forces us all, or forces these companies, no matter they are located in Japan, Malaysia, US, if they are providing services to citizens that are located in the European Union, they have to fulfill the same privacy standards than we are used to fulfill here in Europe. So it's a fundamental right, and because of this, they will have to protect rights as they are. So this is why I was telling you that it's a great privilege to have Sandy here, because this regulation will affect Facebook for the first time, and they will have to, they can be sued from 20 million euros or 4% of their baseline. I mean, we are speaking about huge amounts of money. So to me, well, I've been working at a Spanish social media. I've had to fulfill European regulation and haven't been able to grow from some point because the regulation didn't let me do that, to see how Facebook ate me because they didn't have to fulfill the same control, the same respect to this data privacy. Well, I mean, to me, it's a day to celebrate. I mean, the 25th, because we are under the same umbrella, and all the companies will take care of the citizens' privacy. So in this sense, we'll hold a discussion. I will start just to warm up. Okay, I invite you to participate, and if you want to ask any question from the internet, from the streaming, we will ask Sandy without any type of problem. First question. Well, first of all, thank you, of course. I'm really honored to be here with you. Thanks to Fundación Telefónica for inviting me, and Aspen Institute too. Could you explain for dummies, okay, what is Cambridge Analytica? What has happened with Cambridge Analytica so that my mother that is around can understand it?
Yeah, it's incredibly complicated how this works, and I think that's one of the reasons why this kind of data protection violation has not been addressed earlier, is that people don't understand how it works. So the best way to describe this is, I think most people have used apps that connect to Facebook, but if you haven't, what happens is, if you are either on Facebook or on your mobile device and there's an app that wants to connect to Facebook, it'll pop up a little window that says, hey, this app wants to connect to Facebook. And then it'll ask you, will you allow the app to access these certain kinds of data? Your name, your email address, your friends list, your likes and interests, etc., etc. And if you tap or click OK or allow, then Facebook sends that data to the app developer. Mm-hmm. And the vulnerability, the reason that Cambridge Analytica happened, is that once that data goes to the app developer, Facebook loses any control of it. And so what happened with Cambridge is that they didn't actually make the app. There was another guy named Alexander Kogan who made the app in question. And he made this psychological profile app that a few 100,000 people used. And they agreed to give their data from Facebook to Kogan. But the problem was Kogan then gave all of their data to a company called Cambridge Analytica. And Cambridge Analytica is a data broker. They collect data and they use it to profile people and do stuff, advertising basically with that data. And that was a violation of Facebook's rules. Facebook intended the platform to be used only for the app. They just want people to build cool features. They don't want them to sell the data to data brokers. But the real problem was, and this is a Facebook problem, Facebook had allowed developers to ask for not just your data, but the data of all of your friends at the same time. So of the few 100,000 people, they each had 300 friends or so. And so out of those few 100,000 people, Kogan and then Cambridge Analytica were able to get 87 million people or so, because they got all of the people who used the app and all of their friends. So that's what happened.
Vale, de acuerdo.
Well, so we can assume then that not just with Cambridge Analytica but also with other apps similar to they present post no threat whatsoever, but it could happen with other apps that get their data stolen. Could that have happened to other companies as well?
And I think it's already been revealed that it has happened with other companies. It came out during the Zuckerberg congressional testimony that there were several other companies that Kogan had shared the same data with. So it wasn't just Cambridge Analytica. And I think the chance that this was a one-off incident that only happened once is zero. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was so easy. Developers got so much data. The data had so much value. You could make so much money by selling it or leveraging it in a variety of ways. Surely other people were breaking the rules.
Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much. So sometimes Facebook says in defense that the user is also liable, that they should read the terms and conditions of the app before downloading it or installing it. What's your opinion about those statement that they put the responsibility on the user? What do you think about that? Is that correct, or it is just a lack of transparency in that information that they are delivering?
There are a few problems with that argument. The first is the argument supposes that the app has a privacy policy, and while I was there, in fact, most apps did not even have a privacy policy. It took a while for Facebook to actually force apps to have privacy policies. Then Facebook doesn't actually read the privacy policies of the app. And this became, I knew it when I worked there, but it was very obvious to the world when a U.S. Senator Blumenthal, asked Mark Zuckerberg in the congressional hearing, have you seen the privacy policy of Cambridge, of Alexander Kogan's app? And Mark Zuckerberg had no idea. He clearly had never seen it, which is kind of amazing considering that he was there to talk about that issue. So I can't speak to that, but it's an interesting moment. So that's one big problem with that argument. The other argument is that if you are giving data to a particular app and that app is transferring that data to someone else in violation of the rules, you obviously have no view of that. And frankly, even if they don't transfer it but they use it for other purposes, you have no view of that either. So I think it's actually a pretty weak argument.
Okay. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Regarding the new GDPR, have had the opportunity to have a look at the modifications of the privacy policy, Facebook privacy policy modifications or amendments. I don't think they comply with this GDPR. Do you think that Facebook will be able to make proper use of the GDPR that will comply with it, because it is really very strict and rigorous?
So I have looked at how Facebook is doing the consent screen. I have not read all of the privacy policy in depth. I think in general most people don't read those, which is they're designed not to be read.
Solo me la leo yo, que soy un poco.
Just me, that I'm a little bit weird.
I know you read them, but you're a lawyer. You're a special category. What struck me about the way Facebook had designed the screen, where you actually agree or not agree to their privacy policy, is that they have a big blue button at the bottom that says agree, and everything about the page is designed you just to scroll through and tap on that. And then there's a tiny little gray link if you don't want to agree, that takes you to a page that then has a long amount of information, and then if you decide that you don't want to move forward, you can't use Facebook at all. So I think that's a great option for people, and they are clearly designing that page to get people to do what they want, which is just agree and not think about it.
De acuerdo con.
Right. With the regulation, you shouldn't be able to skip the screen if you haven't given your express consent. So I think there is a lack of accountability of compliance on the part of the platform in that case. Okay, let's continue. The European regulation advocates the empowerment of citizens in the use of their data. Can you conceive a scenario where Facebook would pay the users for having access to the data? Would that be possible?
Access to the data. What kind of access?
That they pay you for giving Facebook your data.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a scenario like that?
Yeah.
Is that possible?
I think it's increasingly plausible. I think they certainly have no desire to do that, nor does Google, nor does anyone else of those technology companies. But I think that as the arguments are made stronger that in fact users are losing economically in a variety of ways through advertising, whether that's through their mobile phone bill, their internet bill, the amount of time they spend loading ads, the amount of time they waste dealing with ads, like all of the downsides of advertising. I think that pressure can be applied on them to rethink the bigger model so that we can reduce the number of ads that people see and they can start making money different ways. I doubt they're just going to cut you a check, though. That would be nice.
Imaginaba.
I wanted to ask you, the GDPR, the European regulation offers maximum protection to the citizen, either European or not. There has been an amendment in the last few days of this regulation that says that the citizen that is just passing through the European Union at some point in time will be protected by that regulation. I think that's the maximum protection possible. Do you think it would be possible that Facebook takes those practices and applies them for the rest of the world? Even though this regulation is applicable globally, the Americans, Chinese, or whatever other nationality will not be protected by that. Can you imagine Facebook complying with the European regulation but globally for the whole world? Is that possible?
No, they're going to do the absolute minimum. And Google will be the same. They will both do the absolute minimum that they have to do to not be sued and pay 4% of their revenue. That is what they will do. And they will probably do even less than that and then argue in court that they are compliant, and then they will allow the courts to force them up to the minimum, absolute minimum bar. And I think one of the key things is they've already moved, at one point Facebook has already moved 1.5 billion users from their data center in Ireland, which is subject to EU law, to their data center in California, which is not, for exactly that reason. They do not want to comply.
No quieren cumplir, eso está claro.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I wanted to ask you one more thing. Let's give let's look at the bright side. I would like to know what's your mission within the foundation, the Center for Humane Technology. What's your role? What are your initiatives? What are you doing right now? Because it looks very interesting what you are just doing there.
Thank you, first of all.
You're welcome.
The mission is, as stated, is to realign technology with humanity's best interests, and that's. Let me try to translate that a bit into non-techie terms. Basically, we want to raise awareness amongst the public of some of these problems, so that people understand and can take action to try to get the technology companies to do the right things, to protect people and to prioritize the users of their products. We want to work with lawmakers to ensure that there are laws that are in place that will protect people and pressure the tech companies to do the right things to protect their users. And then finally, we're actually working to start to design some of the ideas and design principles behind better phones, better news feeds, design the future of what a human-centric version of tech could be. And because we're not a company, we're not for profit, we're just going to give it away. And we're going to try to work with big tech companies, Apple, Microsoft, etc., and try to convince them to implement these ideas.
Es una misión fantástica porque al final es
That's a fantastic mission because it is really just to realign privacy with users' interests and then align that with the business, of course, so that we can grab our own rights and make them our own. I think it's really worthwhile working on that. Are there any questions among the audience? Anyone? Hi, good afternoon. The big companies, big internet companies normally take shelter, so to speak, in the ignorance, so they just say that they didn't know, just to not be liable. They consider themselves intermediaries, platforms, and that's their excuse. Do you think that is going to continue after the GDPR comes into force, since they are neutral platforms, according to their statements? Although you have said that they have their own agenda, they have a way to manipulate and present information in such an order or in such a way that they achieve what they want. Do you think that is going to change or not? And my second question is, Facebook always says that what they did is legal. Is that enough for you as an answer?
So I think they will continue to rely on ignorance as long as we let them. And by we, I mean the people who use the products, us, the governments of the various countries where they operate. As long as we collectively allow them to get away with not complying with the spirit of GDPR, the letter of GDPR, not following through on commitments they made, they will continue to do the absolute minimum to protect people, and they will continue to not want to know about what's going on. We have to hold them accountable if we're going to get them to do the right things, and ultimately we need to move them away from a really destructive business model, and we need to create laws that protect the people who use the products and the society around them. In terms of whether Facebook has followed the law, I think that depends on the case, but I think that because there are now serious investigations in both the UK and the US, and there will probably be elsewhere as well, I am hopeful that to the extent that they haven't followed the law, that they are held accountable by the government for any transgressions that have happened, and that we don't simply rely on them to regulate themselves, which has proved to be a complete disaster thus far, but we actually impose some real, meaningful, and reasonable penalties on them and other companies that do break the law to ensure that everyone knows that you need to follow the law.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? At the back there. Hi, I have a question. When we talk about Facebook, we are talking also about Instagram and WhatsApp, I guess. And it seems that the person, the manager of WhatsApp, has just left because he had some lack of understanding regarding privacy. Do you know something about that? And do you know whether Twitter follows more or less the same rules?
Yes. So, in fact, there were two of the founders, there were two founders of WhatsApp, and they have both quit in the last few months, Brian Acton and Jan Koum. And Jan was the one who just left a few days ago. And it was reported, he didn't say this publicly, but it was reported in the media that he disagreed with Facebook's approach, both on encryption, that they were trying to make encryption, which protects your communications, weaker, and also on data sharing. So one of the things that happened in the EU is that the EU imposed a significant fine, I think it was a few €100 million, on Facebook for breaking its promise not to share data between Facebook, the parent company, and WhatsApp, the company that they bought. And one of the things that my group, the Center for Humane Technology, is also working on, which I haven't really talked about yet today, is antitrust enforcement, right? How do we think about the fact that Facebook and Google especially are huge monopolies, and that smaller, newer companies, Snapchat, for example, are not able to grow and thrive because they are, Facebook and Google are using their monopoly power to prevent anyone from entering the market. And so one thing that could be done that would be very simple and I think quite effective would be if we prevented data sharing between Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Oculus. Those are the four big divisions of Facebook. And ideally Messenger as well, because it's a separate application. And we said, the government said, each of these apps needs to stand alone, and unless you explicitly agree to use your data from Facebook to target ads on Instagram, the company can't do that. The next step of that would be actually break up the company, right? Say each of these four units needs to be a separate company. They compete against each other. They can have different philosophies. And I think one of the things that was frustrating for me watching Jan and Brian leave, and I mean, to be clear, they were not happy. Brian Acton, who is the other co-founder, told everyone recently to delete Facebook. This is someone who made billions of dollars from Facebook. So he is not happy with Facebook, to be 100% clear. One of the things that was frustrating is that, had they been allowed to run their division separately and autonomously, they could have made a bunch of choices that would have given consumers real choice. You can use WhatsApp if you want privacy and you don't want ads, and you can use Facebook if you don't care so much about privacy and you do want ads. But because they have been consolidated and Mark Zuckerberg controls all of them fully, we'll never get that choice.
Muchas gracias. ¿Había una pregunta por aquí?
Is there any question in the first row? Okay, so good afternoon. We're constantly speaking about the data economy, the data market. Maybe it's a little bit inconsistent to speak about a fundamental right like data protection, and at the same time we are speaking about the fact that these data can be purchased, we can market them. I mean, aren't they, these two concepts should be incompatible?
Would you mind saying the question one more time?
Yeah, I was saying that we are speaking about data market and data purchase, etc., and at the same time we are speaking about a fundamental right, a constitutional right. So don't you think that these two principles are a little bit incompatible, inconsistent? If we are speaking about the right to freedom, we can't speak about the freedom market at the same time. That's my opinion.
I think you're raising a really important dichotomy, which is that I think people perceive that someone has to control the data market, either companies or individuals. And I don't think it's that simple. I think the reality is that the companies that build these products have a wide number of ways that they can make money. And I think that if you assume that the only way that they can make money is by gathering the maximum amount of data from you, the user, and either selling it directly or leasing access to it, then I think you're really you're undercutting the reality that they actually can make money a number of other ways, and that that you, the user, should have some control of your data, that you have a right to how your data is used, and that is a constitutional right, as you said, in Europe. It's not currently in the US, but hopefully it will be. And I think that argument also needs to include the fact that there are externalities. There's society level harms that happen that aren't priced into the current marketplace. When an election is, let's take Brexit as an example. I don't know that it was the use of personal data that caused the Brexit result to go the way that it did. But if let's assume for a minute that was the cause, there's going to be huge economic there is already huge economic damage that's been done as a result of Brexit. And so while companies in the data marketplace may have made a significant amount of money in the short term, if you look at the overall economic impact, I think you could argue that there is a significant cost to the economy of the UK as a result of data being misused. Now, again, I'm supposing here that it was data misuse that resulted in Brexit, and it's hard to say definitively if that's true, but I think there are now a number of examples, whether it's violence in Asia, or whether it's discriminatory advertising in the US around housing and credit, where there's clear cost to society, to users, that isn't priced into the marketplace. So I think if you are going to look at it from the perspective of the market, you need to then include all of the externalities too and find an accurate way to price them.
Muchas gracias. Antes estaba el compañero.
Yeah, the colleague here. Good afternoon. Well, the question would be in two parts. First of all, the one that has to do with democratic countries, the GDPR, and the less favored ones. The first part is how trustworthy and feasible is the fact that these data centers that contain all these data, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., are really located here. I mean, if we can have control over them as the European Union, and after that these data are filtered to all data brokers, to steer agents. This is the first part. The second part has to do with your action group. I didn't understand the group, sorry. What type of ideas does it contribute as regards the less favored, like for example Yemen? I mean, these people also use these sources like Spring, Twitter, etc., Skype, Signal, Telegram. All these data, well, we've seen that Apple's going to include data centers in China. It's growing the market. So how do you think that it's possible to protect these communications? Because this is not an economic harm, but a human harm. Some human lives are being lost. And that's it. Thank you.
A bit of a problem with the connection on the translation, so I got some of that. Yeah, it's sort of cutting in and out, unfortunately. But I think the second part of the question was about data center, or the first part of the question was about data centers and the fact that they're located in Ireland. Mm-hmm. And then what?
In other places around the world, so
got it.
The level of protection is...
Got it, yes. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that happened recently is that Facebook decided to move all of its non-EU users from the EU data center to a non-EU data center, in a very transparent move to have them not be subject to GDPR. And it was frankly, it was a fairly cynical move after coming forward in the press and saying, everyone's going to get the GDPR protections. They then, as soon as they could, moved everyone out of the EU so they didn't have to do that. I think that the more transparent and reasonable move would be to say, like, here is how we are going to apply the GDPR, and then basically have a conversation about, like, here's what we're going to do in the EU, here's what we're going to do not in the EU, and we're going to put people in the appropriate data center based on what we're actually doing, as opposed to just moving everyone and then not being transparent about what they're doing. They've been quite confusing about that. With respect to where the data is housed, I think that exposes the fundamental problem of having a single centralized company that runs these services all over the world, that's subject to many countries different laws, and if you actually had instead some kind of an open standard, and then local companies that were building different versions of Facebook or Google or whatever, sharing open source technology, and competition happening within local markets, but not a single monolithic, monopolistic company that was trying to adapt, you wouldn't have these issues. That's a perspective that I've been trying to advance since before I worked at Facebook. I did some consulting work for an organization called One Laptop Per Child, and I helped them think about how they could help local economies build actual laptops. I think it's worth going back to that and saying, like, hey, we have it doesn't make any sense to have an American company that is basically the sole search provider for the entire world. The search should be localized, right? And that will enable better compliance. So I don't know if that answers your question, but okay, awesome. And what was the second part of the question?
Regarding those countries that don't really have, they're not under the umbrella of the GDPR or any other policy.
Yeah.
Let's go, for example, you were mentioning the Rohingyas.
Yeah.
I will go for Yemen, for example.
Right.
All these people, even reporters, Libya happening, right? They go through not only Facebook, which is, the topic today, but they're under the umbrella of everything. Twitter, LinkedIn, Skype, and so on. All this vast information is being located in different data centers under the umbrella of that legislation. So you, and as this approach you were having with One Laptop Per Child, what is your perspective or your approach to this problem? As we're seeing, like, the casualties are not only economic losses, but people dying on a constant basis. Thank you.
Gracias.
Sure. I think to answer that one very quickly, I think it's really the same answer, So I think basically if you had more local organizations building localized software, you would solve a lot of those problems.
Muchas gracias.
That's a huge problem, and that's something that when I worked at Facebook I was very concerned about. I was worried about Facebook data being used by repressive regimes to repress people, and I think you've already seen, there was news that leaked out a year and a half ago or so about a feature that Facebook was building to build censorship features for a Chinese rollout. And that's not just a Facebook problem. Every internet company that moves into China is going to have to comply with their laws and their practices, and that's very, very concerning because they're not an open democratic country.
Sí, yo creo que ahí abrimos un debate ya bestial, ¿no? De los regímenes.
Here we would open a very complex debate. If you feel more comfortable asking in English, just feel free. There's a question at the back.
Thank you so much for your talk. I just wanted to ask what the implications of the blockchain might be, and in terms of how we understand and have ownership of our online identity.
That's a super interesting question. I think the implications are yet to be determined, but potentially fascinating. And I think what's interesting about the blockchain, for those of you who don't know, it's the sort of the core mechanism that powers Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The interesting thing about the blockchain is it enables the possibility of decentralized identity services, because you've got all of these networks of miners, people with computers that are powering the processing of the network, and you've got a ledger that can store essentially a public record without a centralized server. I would be shocked if there weren't people at Facebook and Google and other big companies who are looking into how they could utilize those services right now, but that's probably not. If something useful happens out of the blockchain, it will probably be driven by people outside of those companies, because those companies, their goal is to centralize everything. They want to control everything. And if you take the idea of the blockchain to its final possibility, you could imagine a world where there are no Facebooks and no Googles, and there is this decentralized, sort of magical, this is a very dreamy version of this, where no one needs Facebook or Google. There's no advertising. It's you basically turn on your computer and you share bandwidth, and all the computers in the network power the processing and the computation that's needed to provide all the services that those companies offer currently. The problem with that is that the hard thing about building the next version of one of those companies is not necessarily the software, to be honest. It's all the things you need to do to operate that kind of a network at scale. All of the fraud detection and fighting fraud, all of the, operations of helping people log in when they forget their password, like fighting spam, keeping, pornography and bad content off the network. That is a tremendous amount of the work, and the difference between a successful network like Facebook and a relatively unsuccessful network like MySpace, for example, which did a bad job of that. So in this open source magical blockchain model, who does all that? And I don't know, maybe there's some way you can incent people to do that, but it's much, much harder to manage. So I think it's super interesting, and we'll see what happens.
Gracias. ¿Queda tiempo para una pregunta más?
Okay, we have time for one more question. Thank you, Sandy. It's being really interesting. Well, both contributions are being really interesting. My question, going a little bit beyond authoritarian regimes, I think that the spread of news through social media, and especially Facebook, that is the main source that people use to be informed, is having a great incidence in public discussions. And my question is related to how the algorithm sends news that reinforce what we believe, so it reinforces our own prejudices. So do you think that social media, and particularly Facebook, that is the one that are making public discussion impossible in terms of not having a non-biased discussion in democracies? Thank you.
You're bringing up, one of the things you're bringing up is the sort of the filter bubble debate. And I think, so I am a proponent of the idea that filter bubbles are deeply damaging to democracy and just to general discourse. And I think one of the things that we've all seen, if you use Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or any sort of large-scale discussion forum, that's effectively what a lot of these things are, is that very rapidly the conversation turns negative and then it turns abusive. And so that's one big aspect of it. Another big aspect of it is the way that fake news and misinformation plays into that, which is that the algorithms are designed to optimize for engagement. What that means is they want to show you the thing that you're most likely to tap on or like or whatever, because that's how they make money. And that's how they get you to use the service more, which makes them more money. And the problem with that is the thing that you are very most likely to tap on is a crazy conspiracy theory that's wild and sort of hits you right low on the brainstem, where your lizard brain, so to speak, goes crazy. It's fear, it's anger, it's can this possibly be true? Or like, oh my God, that's so shocking, right? It biases towards the worst instincts of humanity. And I think when you put those two things together, you have a huge problem. The solution, I think, is, first of all, we've built these companies around a business model that makes this pervasive. The reason that all of these products are built this way is they want to, they've designed products that make you feel good, so you keep using them. You feel good in the short term, not in the long term. In the long term, you actually feel more depressed, but in the short term, it makes you, engaged and stimulated. And then we try to keep that up and stimulate you more and more and more and more to get you to keep using them. And the reason that we've done that is because these companies are based around advertising. And if you switch the business model and think about how to redesign, these things, news feeds being one of the big changes that needs to happen, and recommendation engines being the other big change, one of the other big changes that needs to happen. If you change the business model so that they have a relationship directly with you rather than with someone else, and you have some design principles around, okay, like, we really shouldn't be addicting people. We shouldn't be distracting them. We shouldn't be focusing on how we suck all their time out of their life. We should be focusing on how we enrich the time that they spend on these services. If you do those two things, then I think you can resolve a lot of the issues. Not all of the issues, but a lot of the issues. And then you've got to deal with the content moderation piece, which I think arguably is even harder. because then you're dealing with issues of, how do you balance free speech versus, hate and violence and risk? And where do you draw a line and say, what you said was so bad that it can't be on Facebook, or what you said was not so bad that it can't be on Facebook, but bad enough that we aren't going to distribute it to many people, or what you said was kind of bad, but we're still going to share it because it's not that bad. I mean, how you draw those lines in different countries in different ways is very, 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 very hard. And I think, ironically, going back to the earlier question, I think if you had local versions of a lot of these services, those decisions would be better managed by people who had local context. One of the things that happened in Myanmar, where there was just horrible, horrible violence against the Rohingya minority by the majority population, which was propagated on Facebook apps, is that there was at the time no one person at Facebook spoke the local language, and so there were people in Myanmar who were saying, "Oh my God, this is a disaster. There's ethnic cleansing happening. There's violence because of what's going on in your application." There was literally no one at Facebook who could even read what they were writing and read the rumors that were being spread, and so they couldn't do anything. And so if you imagine a world where there's some technology services companies that provide service and open standards and open source software that local companies can use to build their own versions of this, that just wouldn't happen. They would understand the language, they'd understand the local customs, and they would design rules that really made more sense.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, para terminar, Sandy,
Okay, so just to end up, I would like to make a couple of questions. First question. Have you been contacted again from Facebook after leaving and make all these statements? I would like to know what they told you. No?
They have not reached out to me. What they did do after I wrote my first op-ed in the New York Times is they wrote a blog post of their own, and they linked to my blog post, and they said, they actually said something interesting. They said, while it's fair to criticize what we did on Facebook platform 5 years ago, which is interesting, then they listed all of the ways that they were protecting users, and they said, we absolutely do care about privacy, and it's not fair to say that we don't care about privacy. And the thing that was very ironic is that all the things that they said that they did after I left were all things that they didn't do and that was exposed with Cambridge Analytica. They said, we take all this action against developers, and we sue developers, and we do audits, and clearly they did none of those things in the case of Cambridge Analytica. So that's what they did.
Muy interesante.
Really interesting. And one last question. How we can help out to collaborate in Center for Human Technology? I mean, what can we do to help that privacy is respected and we understand how valuable it is? What can we do? How can we help the center?
Very, very new organization. We officially launched the organization 3 months ago. And as of right now, we have 3 full-time employees, of which I am one. So it's very small. We have a large group of people who work with us in a variety of ways, but it's the core team is quite small. And we have this huge mandate. I mean, we're trying to raise awareness about these issues. We're trying to help lawmakers understand what's going on and write better laws. We're trying to design what the future of technology looks like. I mean, that's a huge amount of different subject areas for one very small organization. So the first thing that people can do is you can go to our website, humanetech.com, and you can sign up for our mailing list, and you can in the near future, you'll be able to look at this ledger of harms that I mentioned, which is this list of research about all these problems, and we're going to start building that out and telling people about solutions and gathering people's stories and getting information from you as well as just from us, and building a community around that so that we can not just say, here are all the problems, we can start saying, and here are some solutions. And people can help, decide what those solutions should be. So that is probably the first thing that you should do. And I think over time, we're going to try to build a mass movement around this. I think we want to engage the whole world in identifying problems, describing what's going wrong, and working together to build solutions.
Increíble, muy, muy interesante.
Incredible, really, really interesting. Okay, Sandy, so thank you very much for being so bold in telling your experience, and thank you very much for helping us understand how important privacy is, because I think that people didn't know it up to now. Thank you very much. Thanks to Fundación Telefónica and Aspen Institute. Thank you very much.
Okay.